Welcome, everyone. Ready to dive into the tale of the hike.
Always ready for a good epic.
We're looking at, excerpts, really, from a modern English translation, the Kakuchiban text.
Ah, the Kakuchibon. Gotta love it. It's like, it's the result of centuries of oral storytelling. They really refined it.
So kind of like a director's cut, getting right to the good stuff.
Exactly. Cutting out the fluff,
Yeah.
streamlined, But this deep dive, it's not just about the story itself, right?
Right. We want to get the historical context, who the big players were, and, this story is woven into Japanese culture.
It really is, and I think that's what makes it so fascinating. It reflects on human nature, how power's always shifting.
Yeah.
And those themes, well, they're still relevant today.
Absolutely. Now, the source material mentions 3 different formats within the text: speech, recitative, and song. Sounds a bit like an opera.
That's a great comparison. So speech is your straightforward dialogue like we're having now. But recitative, it's a little more musical, sets the scene, builds the emotion. And then song is, well, think of those powerful areas like a climax.
Wow, so they really pulled out all the stops to keep the audience hooked.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, before we get lost in the drama, gotta rewind a bit. What led to this war? What was going on back then?
So to understand the Genpei War, you got to go back to the 12th century. We're talking about the Hogen and Heike rebellions. They really set the stage for everything that comes after.
So those earlier events were like the opening act.
Precisely. Setting the scene.
Yep.
And then you have retired Emperor Kushirakawa vying for power. And on the other side, the Taira clan.
Also known as the Hike, right?
That's right, the Heike.
Yeah.
Led by Taira no Kiyomori. He was a force to be reckoned with.
Man, it's like a Shakespearean power struggle, but with samurai.
That's a good way to put it.
Was it just politics, though? Or were there, other factors at play here?
Well, one thing the tale of the Heike really highlights is this fear of vengeful spirits. Kiyomori, powerful as he was terrified of the spirits of his enemies, believed they could come back and seek revenge, from beyond the grave.
Whoa, that adds a whole other dimension to it. So not just political, but spiritual warfare, too.
In a sense, yeah. This fear of angered spirits, it's woven throughout the story, really shapes how people acted, what decisions they made. It's a good reminder that history, it's not just events, it's also about the beliefs of the people who lived through them.
Totally. And Kiyomori, from what I've read, he wasn't exactly a nice guy leader, like that Gosechi banquet incident. That was wild.
Oh yeah, the Gosechi banquet, that was a turning point. So picture this, a grand imperial banquet. Kiyomori shows up, with his armed guard, of course, but they're blatantly carrying daggers. It was a total power move.
Bold move, right?
Oh, totally. He was showing everyone who was in charge, didn't care about protocol. And it worked. He became the most powerful man in Japan.
Makes you wonder, when does ambition cross the line?
Well, that's a central theme of the tale of the Heike, right? How fleeting power can be, the consequences of unchecked ambition.
So Kiyomori's actions, did they kind of set the stage for the Heike's downfall?
Oh, without a doubt. He made a lot of enemies, pushed people too far,
Yep.
and that resentment, it eventually boiled over.
Classic case of what goes up must come down.
Exactly.
Okay, but Kiyomori wasn't the only one making waves. Who were the main players on the other side?
So on the Genji side, eventually Minamoto no Yoritomo takes the lead. But there were others,
Okay.
like the warrior Kiso no Yoshinaka and his uncle Minamoto no Yuki. They were all fighting for control.
Wow, so many characters, so much history. Is there one person that you find particularly interesting?
That's a tough one. But I think Shigemori, Kiyomori's son, he's often overlooked.
Oh, interesting.
Unlike his father, he was known for being wise, a diplomat. He tried to rein in some of Kiyomori's harsher impulses.
Like the voice of reason.
Yeah, exactly. Always trying to guide his father, warn him about the dangers of his actions. But often, his words fell on deaf ears.
Sounds like a recipe for some serious family drama. A ruthless leader, and his son trying to pull him back from the brink.
Oh, absolutely. Their relationship, it's one of the most fascinating parts of the story.
So did Shigemori's efforts have any effect? Or was he just, fighting a losing battle?
It's a question that haunts the tale. Shigemori represents, a missed opportunity.
I see.
Maybe a chance for the Heike to avoid disaster. But ultimately, yeah, his efforts were undermined by his father's ambition and, well, other figures in the clan who, let's just say they weren't as concerned with peace.
And then there's the story of Fujiwara no Norichika. Just caught in the middle of this power struggle, his family, they were punished so harshly.
It's a chilling example of how, when people are fighting for power, it's not just them who suffer. It's their families, their friends, everyone around them. And Narachika's story really drives that home.
Definitely makes you think about the ripple effects. And then the burning of Nara, that was just horrific. It felt like a real turning point in the story.
The burning of Nara, yeah, that was huge. It turned a lot of people against the Heike. They were fighting with the monks of Mount Hai.
Powerful religious community, right?
Oh, yeah. And things escalated, and, well, Nara, this beautiful city with all its temples, it was burned to the ground.
A real act of sacrilege.
Exactly. And the Genji, they used it to their advantage, painted the Heike as villains, fueled the rebellion.
So not just brutal, but also strategically pretty dumb.
Yeah, you could say that. They made a lot of enemies with that one. It was a turning point, both in the war itself, but also in how people saw the Heike. They went from being seen as powerful leaders to destroyers. And that image, it stuck with them.
Makes sense. When you burn down sacred temples, people don't forget that.
Definitely not. It was a huge miscalculation on their part.
Last we left off, the Heike weren't exactly making friends. Burning Nara, well, that didn't win them any popularity contests.
No, definitely not. But the war was far from over. The Genpei War, it was a long, brutal conflict. And while the Heike were dealing with the fallout from their actions down in Kamakura, Yoritomo was steadily gaining power.
Yeah, he was building up his forces, right?
Yeah.
And wasn't there like an official decree telling him to take action?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. The source material describes it as a call to arms. Basically told Yoritomo to chastise the Heike and get rid of anyone who was against the emperor.
So it was like he had the emperor's blessing to go after them.
Exactly. It gave Yoritomo legitimacy. He could rally people to his cause, say, hey, I'm doing this for the emperor.
Smart move. So you've got the Heike losing support because of their questionable actions, and you've got Yoritomo down south getting stronger and officially sanctioned. The tide's turning, huh?
It really is. But remember, we also talked about Yoshinaka. He was making moves, too, trying to carve out his own piece of the pie.
Right, right. He was Genji, too, wasn't he?
He was. And that's what makes this whole conflict so fascinating. It wasn't just Heike versus Genji. It was also Genji versus Genji. Everyone was trying to grab power, even within the same family.
It's like a family feud on a national scale.
Exactly. And all set against this backdrop of, mystical beliefs and anxieties. Speaking of which, the source material mentioned this guy, Yixing. He was some kind of adept, right?
Yeah, I remember reading about him. Was he a major player in all this?
Well, his story gives you a glimpse into how important spiritual beliefs were back then. The monks of Mount Hai, they were fighting the Heike, right? And they called upon this Chinese sorcerer, although he was more like a strategist who used divination and military tactics.
So a mystical military advisor?
Yeah, kind of like that.
Yeah.
He advised the monks, told them when to attack, how to defend. It shows how deeply people believed in mystical forces. They really thought these things could influence the outcome of battles.
Interesting. Did Yixing's strategies actually work? Or was it all just, smoke and mirrors?
The tale says he predicted some battles correctly, guided the monks' actions. But it also emphasizes that war is chaotic, unpredictable. Even the best plans can fall apart. It's a reminder that while we can try to control events, history often has its own ideas.
I guess even sorcerers can't predict everything.
So what else happened? Anything else that really stood out?
Oh, there's this one episode I found really interesting. The whole conflict over the name plaques. It might seem like a small thing, but it shows how arrogant the Heike had become.
Name plaques. Refresh my memory on that one.
Okay, so Emperor Rokuju was on a throne, but he was really young. The Hikes were basically running the show. And they decided to remove the name plaques of some court officials who'd fallen out of favor.
Why would they do that?
It was symbolic. By taking down the plaques, they were erasing those officials from history, showing everyone that they were in control.
Wow. Kind of creepy, huh? Like trying to rewrite the past? Yeah, exactly. And it didn't go unnoticed. Go Shirakawa, the cloistered emperor, he saw what they were doing, and he wasn't happy about it. He compared the Heike to a wine jar, overfilled and about to spill over.
So he was basically saying they were headed for disaster.
Pretty much. He saw that their actions were going to have consequences. And this whole name plaque incident, it just added fuel to the fire. People were already resentful of the Heike, and this just made it worse.
So even at the height of their power, they were sowing the seeds of their own downfall. Man, talk about irony.
Yeah, it's a classic theme. The Heike, they had it all, but their arrogance and their disregard for tradition, it ultimately led to their ruin.
Okay, let's circle back to Shigemori for a second. We talked about him earlier, how he tried to be the voice of reason. Didn't he also try to stop Narachika's exile?
He did. Shigemori was really against it. He warned his father that punishing Narachika so harshly would only create more enemies. He even brought up the story of Sugawara no Mishizain, a scholar who was wrongly exiled and became a vengeful spirit.
So he was basically saying, hey, be careful, you might create a vengeful spirit.
Exactly. Shigemori wasn't just wise. He understood the dangers of pushing people too far. He knew that true power came from diplomacy and justice, not just brute force. But Kiyomori, well, he often ignored his son's advice.
Man, what a stubborn guy. So what happened to Shigemori in the end?
Sadly, he died of an illness.
Hmm.
But it's almost as if the constant struggle, the weight of trying to guide his father, it just wore him down. And after his death, things went downhill fast for the Heike.
It's like with him gone, there was no one left to hold Kiyomori back.
Exactly. And his death allowed the more reckless figures, like Tomomori and Shigehira, to gain influence. And they weren't exactly known for their diplomacy.
And those two were heavily involved in the burning of Nara, weren't they?
They were.
Yeah.
Especially Tomomori. He's portrayed as being really vengeful, ordering the destruction of the temples without a second thought. And that event, it really solidified the Heike's image as villains.
Yeah, it's hard to come back from something like that.
It is. But you know, one thing I appreciate about the tale of the Heike is that it doesn't just paint the characters as purely good or evil. They're complex. They have moments of vulnerability, even amidst all the violence.
I see what you mean. Like that story about Taira no Tsunemasa, the biwa player. When the Heike had to flee the capital, he went back to his old temple to say goodbye.
Right. He had been a temple page there years earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And in the middle of all this chaos, he takes the time to go back to this place that was important to him. It shows that even these warriors had deep emotions, attachments to their past.
Yeah, that's really touching. And wasn't there something special about his biwa? Like it was magical or something?
Oh yeah, the story goes that his biwa, Seizan, was given to him by the spirit of a Chinese biwa master. It's said to have all these magical powers.
Wow. So we've got the Heike making enemies left and right, spiraling out of control, and we've got Yoritomo down south playing the long game. What was he doing during all this? Just waiting for them to implode?
Well, Yoritomo, he was a brilliant strategist. He knew that patience was key. So he spent years building up his forces, making alliances, gathering information. He was preparing for the inevitable showdown with the Heike.
So while the Heikes were busy fighting amongst themselves and, burning down temples, Yoritomo was biding his time, making sure he was ready when the moment came.
Exactly. He knew that the Heike's own actions would ultimately be their undoing. And he also had this advisor, Mangaku, remember? That monk who pushed him to rebel in the first place.
Yeah, wasn't he kind of the troublemaker, always stirring the pot?
Mangaku was a fascinating character. Charismatic, but also a bit eccentric. He really believed in Yoritomo's destiny. He used his religious authority to undermine the Heike, spread dissent, and he was good at it.
I bet the Heike hated him.
Oh, they did. They even threw him in jail at one point for speaking out against them.
Yeah.
But Mangaku, he thrived on that kind of conflict. He knew how to provoke them, how to get under their skin.
So you've got Yoritomo, the strategic mastermind, and Mangaku, the charismatic agitator. It sounds like a pretty powerful duo. Did they finally make their move against the Heike?
They did, but before we get to that, there are a few more pieces of the puzzle we need to fit in. There are still some key characters and events we haven't talked about yet that are going to lead us to that final showdown.
Okay, so we've been talking about this whole tangled web of alliances and betrayals, all this ambition and revenge. It all led up to the Genpei War. But what happens next? Does Yoritomo finally decide to make his move against the Heike?
He does, finally. Yoritomo realizes the time is right, and, well, he unleashes his secret weapon, his younger brother, Yoshitsune. This guy was an amazing military commander, and he leads the Genji forces right at the Heike, who, by this point, are pretty weakened and isolated.
Yoshitsune, he sounds pretty formidable. Was he like his brother, all about strategy and patience, or was he more, direct, a decisive leader?
Yoshitsune was known for being a little unorthodox, daring. Like, take the Battle of Ichinotani, the Heike. They were holed up in this fortress, practically impregnable, or so they thought. They were feeling pretty confident.
Yeah, I bet they thought they were untouchable, sitting there in their fortress. So how does Yoshitsune approach this? Does he try to, starve them out, lay siege?
Nope, not Yoshitsune. He goes for a surprise attack. He divides his army, sends a small group to attack from the front, just to distract them. Meanwhile, he takes the main force, leads them on this crazy trek through the mountains.
Through the mountains? That sounds treacherous.
It was, but it gets them right behind the Heike lines.
Whoa, talk about a flanking maneuver. That's brilliant. Did it work?
Oh, it worked beautifully. The Battle of Ichinotani was a huge win for the Genji. The Hikers were totally caught off guard. A lot of their key leaders, Gone, killed, or captured. Their forces were dwindling fast.
Man, sounds like the Heike's luck was running out. But they didn't just give up, did they? There was still one more big fight, right? A final showdown.
That's right. The final battle, the one that decided everything, it was the Battle of Dan no Ura, a naval battle.
Hmm.
Imagine hundreds of warships all clashing in this narrow strait, the Shimonoseki Strait, the fate of Japan, right there on the line.
I'm getting chills just thinking about it. So, who had the advantage going into this last battle?
Well, at first it seemed like the Heike might actually pull it off. I mean, they were experienced sailors. Plus, they had the young emperor and Toku with them on their flagship.
So they had the emperor on their side. That's a powerful symbol.
It was. They were fighting for their emperor, their clan, their very survival. But then fate stepped in. The tide literally turned against them. The currents shifted, and it started working in favor of the Genji fleet.
Whoa, talk about bad timing.
It was. And a lot of people saw it as a sign, like the gods themselves were against the Heike. It really demoralized them.
I can imagine. When even nature seems to be against you, it's got to feel like the end. So the Genji, they took advantage of this, right?
Oh, absolutely. There's even this part in the tale where a white banner just appears out of nowhere and lands on one of the Genji ships. They took it as a divine omen. It was like their morale got a supercharge while the Heike just deflated.
Wow, talk about psychological warfare. It sounds like the Heike were facing defeat on like every level, physically, strategically, even spiritually. So what happened? How did it all end?
The Battle of Danyora, it was a complete rout. The Heike, they were crushed. Many of their warriors, they chose to drown themselves rather than surrender. Even the young emperor, Antoku, and his grandmother. That's how devoted they were.
Wow, a tragic end to a once mighty clan. It's a stark reminder, how fickle power can be. But the tale of the Heike, it's not just about battles and politics, right? It's also about the human stories, the individual lives caught up in all this chaos. Are there any that really stick with you?
One of the most powerful stories is about Atsumori. He was a young Heike warrior. And Kumagai Naozan, he was a seasoned Genji general. They come face to face on the battlefield. And Kumagai, he sees Atsumori, this young, noble guy, and he hesitates. He doesn't want to kill him.
Man, that's heavy. A moment of like human connection, even in the middle of a war. So what happens? Does Kumagai spare him?
Unfortunately, no. He has his orders, he has a duty, and he ends up killing Atsumori. But it's clear he regrets it. He mourns this young life he had to take. It really captures the tragedy of war, the impossible choices people are forced to make, the toll it takes, no matter which side you're on.
Yeah, there are no real winners in war, are there? And the tale of the Heike, it doesn't shy away from showing how war affects everyone, not just the soldiers. What about the regular people, the civilians?
Absolutely. The tale shows their suffering, too. You see families running from the capital, people living in fear, not knowing what's going to happen next. War leaves scars, even on those who aren't fighting.
It's a good reminder that war is never just about armies clashing. It's about people's lives being shattered. So we've talked about all these tragic figures, these losses. Is there anyone whose story offers, I don't know, maybe a glimmer of hope? Something to hold on to?
There is one story. It's still tragic, but it shows how, even in the midst of conflict, there can be a kind of transcendence. It's the story of Taira no Koromori, Shigemori's son. He's portrayed as a good man, honorable. And after the Heike lose at Danyora, he runs away. He goes to Mount Koi, this sacred mountain. It's a place for spiritual retreat, for finding enlightenment.
So he basically left everything behind, trying to find peace. Did it work? Did he find what he was looking for?
At first, yeah, being in that secluded place gave him some solace. But the past, it's not so easy to escape. Koromori, he couldn't let go of what happened, the memories of his family, the weight of his name. And in the end, he takes his own life. It's a sad story, but it shows how powerful guilt can be, how hard it is to find redemption when the world around you is broken.
Yeah, that's heartbreaking. Even in trying to find peace, he couldn't escape the trauma of war. This whole deep dive into the tale of the Heike, it's been a journey. We've talked about ambition, loyalty, betrayal, how fragile power is, how war changes everything. What do you hope people take away from this story? What's the big takeaway?
I think what makes the tale of the Heike so powerful is that it's not just about some ancient conflict. It's about us, about human nature. It shows how capable we are of both great things and terrible things. And it's about that search for meaning, for something to hold on to when the world feels like it's falling apart.
It makes you think about how the lessons of the past, even the painful ones, they can still teach us something today.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
By understanding history, the motivations of the people who lived through these events, their hopes, their fears, we can understand ourselves better. And maybe, just maybe, we can avoid making the same mistakes.
I like that. Learning from the past to create a better future. Well, I want to thank you for taking us on this journey through the tale of the hike. It's been an eye-opening experience.
The pleasure was all mine. And to everyone listening, if you're interested in learning more, I highly recommend checking out the full translation. Or even some of the adaptations. There are movies, plays. It's a story that's been told and retold for centuries.
And as you explore this world of samurai and emperors and, vengeful spirits, think about how it connects to our world today. How do the themes of power and ambition and the consequences of conflict, how do they still resonate? Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.